Okay, so here we are on Wudong Mountain, Qigong study trip 2017, an II Qigong and Tai Chi study trip to China, led by senior trainer Jessica Colby. Okay, next one. So the scientific research on Qigong started in the early 80s in China. And at the same time in the United States, Dr. Ken Sancerre completed a distinguished career at SRI International in California and started looking around for something to satisfy his intellectual curiosity. And he found Effie Chow and she turned him on to Qigong and helped him to start the Qi to promote a scientific understanding of Qigong. And Sancerre created this Qigong and energy medicine database to catalog all the information that was being published in China. Now, the problem was that the stuff in the conference proceedings were in Mandarin, which he wasn't too adept at. But fortunately, the abstracts weren't. So he got this abstract database built up by the mid 90s with hundreds and hundreds of abstracts, and he was able to publish a number of papers based on this. So he published over 27 original papers on Qigong, including one of his seminal papers, Anti-Aging Benefits of Qigong. And this was like the first medical research published on Qigong, which summarized research to date in China. Next one. So these are some of the things that he found, and all of these have been confirmed. Like Qigong plus drugs is better than drugs alone. And you have improved cardiovascular function. I like the one reversing symptoms of aging. That's a great one for me because I'm like 75 and anything I can do to reverse aging is great. And Qigong and Tai Chi are great for that. And it also benefits people with hypertension. And there's been a lot of research on that, just specifically on that. But it turns out that Ken was a materials scientist and he published original paper, over 70 papers. He had patents. And so he spent years with his own research on Qi because he saw what the benefits were. But he found absolutely no scientific evidence for Qi. And in fact, nobody has found any scientific evidence for Qi, including scientists in China. So where does that leave us as Qigong enthusiasts? Next. So it's best to look at this, especially if you're talking to a Western medical audience. What Qi does is function, and how it does it is bioenergy. And as our friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Wayne, who's the director of the Osher Center for Integrative Health at Harvard Medical School, likes to call it information exchange. And examples of information exchange are electrical impulses in the brain and the spinal cord. Roger loves to talk about Qi for hours and tell us that the Chinese like to spend hours talking about it also. But the bottom line is that adapt your language to your audience. I mean, that's the message here. If you've got an audience that is not receptive to Qi, then don't mention it. If you have an audience that's into it, then go for it. And we're an audience that went for it, and we just saw Owen's presentation. It was great. But just tailor your presentation. Okay, next one. So Roger was one of the first ones who did tailor his presentation. In 1997, he wrote The Healer Within, and he introduced Qigong to Western medical audiences by describing the fundamental practices of Qigong in Western medical terms. And so he described, movement, massage, different types of breathing, and meditation leading to relaxation. And he highlighted a very important holistic concept of our innate healing capability that can be enhanced and accessed through Qigong. So the benefits of Qigong were known by the latter part of the 90s, but the majority of the actual body mechanisms responsible for the benefits of Qigong were not known, but boy, did things change in the 2000s. Next one. And so we have these advances in medical research in the 2000s, and they were huge. So brain plasticity right off the bat. I remember the first inkling I saw of that was like in about 2005 or so. And brain plasticity is huge because up until that time, everybody thought that the number of neurons that you got in connections were a fixed property, like in your late 20s or early 30s. That's not the case. And that is the reason why you can do mindfulness practices or breathing practices or exercise practices and have immediate changes in the brain, actual physical changes in the brain. And that's huge. And another thing that's very huge is interoception, which we're going to talk about in detail. And that's probably the one thing if I were to say the one thing you should learn about Qigong, if you're a teacher, is interoception, because it involves emotional regulation, and emotional regulation is very, very connected to stress and inflammation. And stress and inflammation are connected to what's the state of your autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system is affected by vagus nerve stimulation. Okay, so next one. We're going to, now I'm just going to go over a few of these milestones that we got to either participate in or see in the 2000s also, which were really big deals. So Roger, again, was one of the people who organized this milestone 2005 National Expert Meeting on Qigong and Tai Chi. And the purpose of expert meetings is to increase the physical activity in adults over 50. So thousands of organizations providing services for older adults were represented through the National Council on Aging. They attended, as well as doctors and lineage holders and researchers, and then people like me and Dr. Linda Larkey, who's a premier Qigong researcher at Arizona State University. And there's a lot of conclusions in there, and I'd highly recommend that people go check this out. And it's on the Tai Chi Easy website.
Tom, I want to interrupt here
Yeah,
because Tai Chi
go for it.
Easy actually pretty much emerged out of this national expert meeting, Qigong and Tai Chi report. So this was something that was kind of gestating for a while at IIQTC. Roger Rianka developing the movements and actually finding a very willing audience to have Tai Chi Easy. So Tai Chi Easy really got very much off and running developmental wise. And then, more people trained, and this is kind of this beautiful phenomenon of now Tai Chi Easy actually has a research base, an evidence base that's been growing scientifically. So just wanted to make that note. Back to you, Tom.
Okay, so the most important conclusions you can see here that Tai Chi practice for health is equivalent to Qigong. I would argue that Tai Chi is Qigong, and most people who understand this would probably would agree, even lineage holders. And the group also defined the fundamental practices which were common to both Qigong and Tai Chi. And again, Tai Chi Easy is an example of this. So on to the next important thing is in 2009, Dr. Linda Larkey, II grad, and Roger came up with introduced Qigong and Tai Chi as meditative movement to the medical research community. And they define meditative movement as consisting of movement, breathing, meditation, relaxation. Sounds familiar? So
Yeah,
that
and it also gave researchers a way to categorize other kinds of exercise that fits the criteria, right, of meditative movement, right? Like there's a lot out there. So it's great to start finding the commonalities. Anyway, back to you.
Yep, next. So in 2010, the dynamic duo and a few other people came up with the comprehensive review of the health benefits of Qigong and Tai Chi. And this is the first systematic review on Qigong and Tai Chi using the clinical research gold standard of randomized controlled trials. And you can see all the things that it's good for. So there's bone density, cardiopulmonary, physical, physiological, falls related, all that, which is more on the physiological side, but you also have the quality of life, which is often associated with like breast cancer survivors and other types of conditions. So we could take the whole rest of the time that we have to go over all the research that says that Qigong and Tai Chi are good for X, where X is one of these things or some other condition. But we want to focus on what the fundamentals are of Qigong.
Yeah, one note here on the 2010 paper here, the Comprehensive Review of Health Benefits of Qigong and Tai Chi. It was one of the first papers that really set the tone or this methodology of treating Qigong as equivalent to Tai Chi. And so this is something that we might discuss a little bit more. But in the research in science, we really want to have precision, right? So, just what does Qigong do? And then what does Tai Chi do? So, in the way IIQTC teaches it is that really want to see the commonality. And this is what Tom is referring to as the fundamentals, right? And we're talking about mind focus, breath focus, body focus, right? So this is one of the first papers that did that, but then it was cited over and over again to be able to see the benefits of all the studies, Qigong studies and Tai Chi studies together, and then see that there's this comprehensive, beneficial body of information that just spans across all these kind of ailments and illnesses and health conditions. Yeah, anyway, so back to you. We're going to change slides. Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Next. So we were jazzed in 2013 when Peter Wayne came out with the Harvard Medical School Guide to Tai Chi. Boy, did that put Tai Chi on the map. And if you haven't read this, you definitely want to do it. One of the most important concepts in the book is that Tai Chi is not a single therapy, like a drug. It also has, in addition to physiological components, it also has psychological and social concepts aspects. And this is a big deal because that's a bit of a challenge because it makes it a little more difficult when you're doing a randomized controlled trial to figure out, well, what are the biomarkers and how are we actually going to measure this thing? But it's been a tremendous endorsement of Tai Chi and Qigong. Okay, next one. So the health benefits of Qigong, if you were going to just briefly say what they are, exercise with, posture, movement, breathing and meditation. So what we're going to do is we're just going to briefly discuss a little bit about each one of these things. Next. So first of all, in 2016, so Time Magazine comes out with a cover that says if exercise were a drug, it would be the most valuable pharmaceutical ever developed. And that's just huge. And the thing is, the medical community up until about 10 years ago was not super pushing exercise. I mean, they always, the doctors always knew this was a big deal, but they weren't like front and center, and you didn't see it in media and all this other stuff. And interestingly enough, exercise is not really a standard part of medical school education. So Qigong is exercise, and that alone is a humongous health benefit. Okay, next one. So the American College of Sports Medicine is the world's largest sports medicine and exercise science organization in the world. And what their vision is to extend and enrich lives through the power of exercise. So every 10 years, they come up with their position stands to provide guidance for medical professionals who prescribe individual exercise. And in 2010, it was so cool. They came out and they recommended Qigong and Tai Chi. So and you can see for cardiorespiratory, musculoskeletal, neuromotor, resistance, flexibility, balance, agility, coordination, all this stuff is function. But also remember, so it's good for function, but also they're recommending prescribing it. It's not just like oh, well, this is a good thing. They're saying doctors, medical professionals prescribe this stuff because it's so good for you. Okay. So then Harvard Medical School says things like engaging in regular exercise is linked to multiple health benefits, including cognitive, which I love that one, and perhaps reducing risk of dementia. Well, Harvard Medical School has a weekly publication that I think anybody who's interested in just being healthy and everything, like I think everybody who's here today is, this publication is worth signing up for. And the thing that I especially like about this is that what they're pointing out is that regular exercise doesn't just affect physiology, it affects your cognitive abilities as well. And so it's not immediately obvious how that happens, but we'll explain a little bit about that as we go along. Okay, next one. So from the Chinese standpoint, the Chinese have started, I started seeing this, I don't know what, 10 years ago or whatever, about this term traditional Chinese exercise. And it includes a lot of different forms of Qigong, like, Bod Wan Jin and animal frolics and tendon changing and animal healing sounds and Tai Chi, but it's just Tai Chi ruler. But it's a research trend. And what the government is heavily promoting this in China because, they got over 1 billion people, and that's expensive to try and keep these people healthy. So they want to try and teach them this stuff. And so they are teaching it throughout the school system as just like they would any other sport. And there's leagues and competitions, et cetera. And I remember in 1999, the Falun Gong organization sort of challenged the Chinese government a little bit. And so the Chinese government shut down Qigong. And so I was with a group in 2000 in Beijing, and we were practicing Qigong in the park, and we got busted by the police because you just didn't say the word Qigong, let alone try to do it out in public where people could see you. So they said, go back to the hotel, get out of here. But it's encouraging to see the Chinese government is done a 180, and now they're just totally onto this. But of course, then they do what the Chinese government always does, they control it. And so they have what's called health Qigong, quote unquote. And it's their version of Qigong and their version of Bod Wan Jin. And so that's the one they promote. And in fact, they don't have World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. They have World Health Qigong Day in September instead of World Tai Chi and Qigong Day in April. But it's really good Qigong. And in fact, one of my absolute favorite types of Qigong is Ma Wang Doi Dayan Shu, which is one of the health Qigongs. Okay, next. So that was exercise. So breathing, I mean, we're drilled in about diaphragmatic breathing, but what we might not be quite drilled in enough is nose breathing. And nose breathing is huge because that involves getting more nitric oxide to your body, and not nitrous, not when you go into the dentist and get high. It's nitric oxide. And so that's a vaso and bronchial dilator. And also, I didn't know this, but it's antiviral and antibiotic too. So the bottom line with the breathing, though, is what are you doing with the breathing? Well, it's nervous system balance. I mean, in nervous system balance, it's not just a physical benefit, though, because the function and emotional regulation are enhanced. So next one. Now, enhancing the nervous system has been known since the 70s. I mean, you got Benson's relaxation response was groundbreaking, and just like John Kabat-Zinn taking mindfulness and making that public. So what they got across with this was that you're counteracting stress, you're relaxing, and you're down-regulating the sympathetic nervous system. But that was about it. But the overall science of the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, was not really emphasized or elaborated or researched as much until this century. Okay, next one. So how does the autonomic nervous system work? Well, of course, this is taught in medical schools. The sympathetic and parasympathetic are two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, and they go up and down like a teeter-totter. But that's not exactly the way it works. Next one. Stephen Porges came up with polyvagal theory, which said the poly means multivagal, multiple vagus, which means there's two parasympathetic circuits in the vagus nerve. And one of them is the one you're familiar with, the ventral vagal, rest, digest, restore, health, growth. And the other one's fight or flight. Okay, well, you can be in either one of those states. Well, the fight or flight, that's not part of the parasympathetic, but it's this continuum here. The polyvagal theory is this continuum that features the sympathetic fight or flight and then two circuits of the parasympathetic. So we're familiar with the first two, but we're not familiar with the dorsal vagal. Dorsal vagal is like the original vagus, and it's the one that happens when you're threatened, and there's freezing, dissociation, immobilization, and stillness is the first step towards emotional immobilization and collapse. And this is why some people freak out when they start practicing mindfulness. And this is huge to know, because you think you hear all this great stuff about getting into parasympathetic mode, and oh, everything's going to be great and you're going to get benefit from it, but some people will freak out and it won't help them at all.
Yeah,
So
so one thing we want to take away from this idea of polyvagal theory, right, is that there are just more nuanced ways of looking at nervous system. And so this is going to be a beautiful bridge to Qigong practice. And it's starting to think about it that way, that, that it's human beings having human experiences, and that, your response, your reaction, the fear, the freeze response, whatever happens in context, right? So this is where we want to start thinking about it that way, and that's what polyvagal theory is really good for. And then that's going to inform the design of science, but also the decision whether to practice or to offer practice to a population or to patients. And I have experience with that. So are we ready for the next slide?
yeah. So ANS regulation is one of the key benefits of Qigong, and the reason being that the diseases manifest through ANS dysfunction. And so when you start going parasympathetic, you're down-regulating inflammation and stress. And that's huge, because inflammation and stress is associated with all disease, and especially chronic illness, which Western biomedicine doesn't address very well. And also, people don't quite keep this in mind, that the amount of inflammation you've got in your body is a key determinant of how healthy you are. And this is the term whole person health, which we'll be saying a little bit more about next. So this brings us to the Qigong state, and Michele Csikszentmihalyi is the guy behind flow, and that flow people know or play as something that you just do without thinking. You're totally in the zone and achieving great results at it. And I always wondered, well, hey, wait a minute. Qigong, this practice is putting me into parasympathetic. And so how come I'm able to, if I'm doing rest and digest and parasympathetic and chilling out, relaxing, how is it that I'm able to do these Tai Chi moves or Qigong moves? Well, polyvagal theory has made it very clear that you can have blended states. And so what we call the Qigong state, unless you're doing, of course, lying down Qigong or easy sitting Qigong, you're gonna have some sympathetic in there. So blended states are what allows you to be able to have relaxation, but still get a little bit of exercise and movement out of it. And if you're a Taoist fan, the term for it is Wu Wei, effortless, that spontaneous, effortless effort. Okay, next one.
Yeah, I just want to say something
Oh,
about the
yeah.
Qigong state here, and just thinking about the the term relaxed and alert, right? This is that whole idea of you can be alert, you can be responsive. There's this idea of your nervous system can get so relaxed that you collapse, right? And that's really the thing about the vagus nerve that we don't talk about. That's the dark side of the vagus nerve, right? Where it can make you faint, right? It can make you lose consciousness. So we go into that Qigong state using that vagus nerve very skillfully, right? And that's the relaxed and alert state that we're talking about, the Qigong state. This is where you would have that experience of flow, which has been documented and researched, and then play also, as Tom is saying. So we're going to go to the next slide now.
Yep. And so you've heard the term mind body, but mind body is something that people have a little bit of trouble wrapping their head around. What does it actually mean? And so we're going to go through that. Breathing and mindfulness are the foundation of Qigong meditation, and they give you present moment awareness. But the 800-pound elephant in the room is, or gorilla in the room, is interoception. That's the biggest part of Qigong meditation. And Qigong, interoception is such a new subfield of neuroscience that its first international conference was held in 2016.
Yes, so
So,
it's an old term. This is to be clear, right? Just in the neuroscience, it's old actually. But what's happened recently is ways of measuring interoception, right? And to recognize it as a term, and then it becomes this organizing principle or concept. And that's really important, right? We go back always to principles, always to how to think about this stuff. So are we ready for the next slide?
okay. So interoception, yeah, it goes back to canon in the 20s and 30s,
Right. Yeah.
and the idea of homeostasis. Okay, so next one. Mind-body meditation. Now you've got the hard problem of consciousness is explaining consciousness itself or subjective experience. So there's these new agey ideas of, oh, there's some universal consciousness out there that we connect to. Or there's this current harebrained, popular mechanics article, which you can see on media right now, that's proposing that consciousness is in another dimension. Well, these aren't real helpful, but there is an interoceptive cortical region of the brain that maintains a map of the body and brain condition. And it's in the same place in the brain that's used for representing and processing feelings and emotional awareness and subjective images of self. And we have Bud Craig's 25 years of research to thank for this. And so interoception, the important thing here too is that it's an interoceptive map, not just the body, but also the brain. Okay.
And then so the
Yeah.
interoceptive map has also been referred to just the brain structures as the salience network, where salience means, and this is a very emotional term, of things that have meaning in the environment. So things that you would react to, things that you would interact with in the environment. Really, really important because this starts to, you see where it's very exciting. The science starts to put the individual in a society, in the world, right? So it's not just measuring your lung function, but what's your lung function like when you're in a polluted environment, for example, this like, whoa, that's going to be really different. So let's keep going.
Right. So interoception is literally the interconnection of the mind and the body. So then we come to interoceptive awareness. So you objectively detect something physiological in your body, and then you subjectively experience that. So interoception, it turns out, is the underlying neurological mechanism of mindfulness-based practices. And the subjective experience is something that is triggered by this objective detection of body activity. So next. So originally, the definition here is that interoception maintains functional homeostasis. So you can see all the body activities, immune system, endocrine, nervous, cardiovascular, respiratory, et cetera. It's the neurological mechanism for that. And then again, Bud Craig is the guy who really got everybody aware of that. Functional neuroanatomy. It's not some new agey kind of idea. It's solid science. And it's solid science that defines what mind-body really means. So we've been talking about sort of the body part of interoception so far. So let me just say, we'll say a little bit about the psychological part. Next one. So psychophysiological is a research term for mind body. And again, the original definition of interoception was just maintaining homeostasis. We can thank Walter Cannon for that. So that's your physiological health. But it turns out that interoception now, the definition of it is coming to encompass self-regulation, which includes emotional regulation, and then subjective experience, which is cognition, behavior, decision-making, and ultimately conscious awareness. So this isn't really a new idea because, in the late 1880s, the James Lang theory of emotion said that emotions arise when physiological changes enter conscious awareness. And so Bud Craig in the 2000s did his work, which we just talked about. So Walter Cannon was functional homeostasis. So Bud Craig's work is emotional homeostasis. So interoception in Qigong leads to both functional homeostasis, but even more important, emotional homeostasis.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's that idea that you have all this experience physiologically or that you can sense, and then you do something with it. And that itself, your decision to react to your thirst, your hunger, the butterflies in your stomach or whatever, becomes an action in the world, or it becomes cognitive input into your brain, into your thoughts, into your system. Okay, next slide.
Yep. So we're summarizing this, but we're saying it again and again, but we want to get this point across about how important interoception is. So the lower interoceptive accuracy means you're going to have dysfunction of some sort, and that can be emotional or physical. And if you have accurate interoceptive awareness, then your physiological and mental processes are going to be tilted on the side of improving your health and resilience. Okay. And some examples of dysfunction are the following. You can see them here. There's clinical and emotional problems, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, autism, all these. So again, interoception is a mind-body practice, and it's not just the body, which is the function, it's the mind and it's emotional regulation. And Qigong is emotional regulation. So next one. And that's the summary there. And greater health and resilience are associated with higher interoceptive accuracy. So hopefully we've drilled that one in. Okay.
All right, ready. Take a
Yeah.
breath, everybody. Whew.
Yeah. Right.
All right, so I appreciate the questions coming in, and this is where I take over primarily. But as you can see, this is a conversation that Tom and I are having, with you today. But I want you to think about interoceptive awareness is something you can do with skill. All right, this is where Qigong teachers, Tai Chi teachers, mind body teachers really come in. That's why we're talking to you, because there's great value to what you do, to what this is as a practitioner, as an educator. So you can experience this personally in your own practice and really be able to share that with others. But then what does it mean when you add it to a healthcare regimen, right? So this is what we're going to talk about next. And there's a conceptual element here and then a little bit of an application. All right, so appreciate the questions coming in. So, if we think about Qigong as a mind-body practice, whole person health exercise practice, it's a therapy. It's something that you can do to improve a health condition, a circumstance, an illness. And I'm sure a lot of you in the Zoom room have actually experienced this for yourself, right? You've used the practice to somehow improve your emotional state or even, a physical ailment of some kind. And I myself have had experience with that. And I want you to think about that concept of how if you approach Qigong that way, right? This is now you're using it, you're applying it as a health regimen itself. But it brings to mind what we talk about when we talk about health is you want to compare health to your life, right? So we have something called health span versus lifespan. So what's happening in our modern times is that people are living longer, but the quality of their life starts to go down, right? It starts to go down as they age. So, you become frail, you become infirm at a certain age. And so this is that idea of how long does your health last, right? Your health, how does it span? And so this is where if we start thinking about asking that question, and this is what's lovely about what's happening right now is that these conversations are beginning to happen thanks to identifying these concepts of what is a human being when a human being is well. So start to think about a human being as being well rather than what's a human being when they're ill and how do you fix it, right? So this is where we talk about prevention. Prevention, big, big deal. So this is, again, this is where you come in as a teacher, as a person who does this. So this is where also Tom and I had the conversation about like, well, what about if we considered healthcare as Qigong healthcare, right? Qigong healthcare is a kind of healthcare where we start to expand that definition of what's medical. I start to emphasize the wellness, start to emphasize the prevention, start to think about and imagine what's it like to be well, right? And just how is that enacted, right? How does that happen? And then what are the behaviors of being well, right? What are the behaviors? So this starts to open up health a little bit more. So it's not this idea of let's fix what's broken, right? Let's make you well. And we know that from our level one training is that, we are identifying how do you tone the system? How do you make it well? How do you get in touch with the healer within, right? So this is starting to be Qigong healthcare where the individual can take care of themselves with that right education. So think about that as patient-centered health, holistic. This is encouraging people to really own their health, right? Really say, this is what you can take care of, and this is how we're going to help you do that by teaching you some skills. All right, so these are the skills, right? We're saying this is self-care where you can take care of yourself every day, moving your body, doing something for your mind. Hey, how about Qigong practice? How about a meditation practice? And we realize too that we are trying to impart values to people to do this for life, right? To care about health, to do something about wellness rather than wait for something to go wrong, right? So this is where like, oh, this becomes a very conscious activation of somebody's well-being. And we do want to emphasize that it's education, not treatment. And this is where my experience as a teacher really has been central, right? I'm not a Qigong therapist particularly, and that does exist, right? We have, medical Qigong practitioners and so forth. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that there's a big role in being an educator and showing people the way, right? And just really bringing that home. That's going to really speak to the agency of people, right? Their ability to make decisions, right? To speak to that, and to even check in with them, right? About being well. Really, really important. That starts to create that dialogue that's kind of missing right now in healthcare settings that are, more traditional in the Western sense. So then we think about Qigong healthcare as involving our meditative movement, mind-body awareness, right? So we say our value is exercise is fundamental to health. We really encourage people to do that. We really encourage breathing, right? Really encourage that's that doorway, right? That doorway to come into practices, to do practices that just right where you are. And that could be just like this amazing little piece of information that you give people that just suddenly that starts to be in their awareness. One of the hardest things I think in mind body practices is how do you get people to remember, right? How do you get people to remember to do practice, right? That's a big idea. All right, and then finally, uh, conscious awareness. We want to really start to encourage conscious awareness of health, conscious awareness of relationship, of conversation, of talking about these things in terms of wellness. So this is where our institutions are really, really helpful, really kind of getting on the ball with this. We want to just bring a little bit of light to that. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, the NCCIH, has been embracing this definition of healthcare and really moving beyond that biological model, right? So that we do talk about whole person health and then also even say, how do we measure that? Right? How do we measure that? How can we look at a population and say, is it well, right? Is it well? Are people just being well, or are they just beginning to get sick, right? And so this has been especially relevant when we think about governance and policies, right? So this is how do we encourage people to be well? What do we say is the law? What is the regulation, for that? Well,
And one other,
NCCIH, oh, sorry.
one other thing, a whole person health. Um, that we want to emphasize that it includes not just biomedical, but it also includes the psychological and social. And that's huge. And both NCCIH and the VA are recognizing that. So
Yeah,
that is holistic. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
That is
you're anticipating our slides coming up, Tom. Thank you.
that is
Yes.
holistic,
Yeah,
right?
so but also just bringing to mind the institutions that exist right now that are really paying attention to this, sponsoring research for it in that sort of thing. So very, very important that that's what we're looking at and that's what's happening out there. So we're going to bring to attention, and right now I'm going to share this the strategic plan of the NCCIH, of the National Institute of Health, that they have plans for using these practices. I'll just put that in the meeting chat right now that you guys can take a look at that. It's a PDF you can download. I think it's kind of long, but you could see that there are plans for research for mind body practice, for interoception in particular. Just interoception is considered a biomarker, and like Tom alluded to the fact that interoception has also had conferences and just like interoception scientists and the talking about the biomarker and how to measure it, right? So how do you measure that in people? So take a look at that at your leisure,
And
and we'll just
it includes Qigong and Tai
that's
Chi.
right, and it's mentioned by name.
It
That's
actually
right.
mentions it. Yeah.
Actually mentioned my name. So the new director of the NCCIH is super smart. Helen, you're going to help me with the
Lang
last name,
Langevin.
Langevin, right? Just super smart and also very, very just aware of these research trends, really supporting them and making them so. So we want to think about our whole person health as approached by the institutions, or this institution in particular, as empowering individuals, families, communities, and populations to improve their health in multiple interconnected domains: biological, behavioral, social, and environmental. So really, I mean, these are the conversations that are happening, and it's just been a long journey, right? I mean, if we think about when Healer Within the book came out, so this is like finally of some fruit happening in society. Really, really exciting to see that.
And
All right.
one recent thing is that the latest newsletter from NCCIH, which people might want to sign up for, the 25th anniversary symposium is going to be held on December 2nd, and it's exploring the impact of whole person health. So
Yes, and actually that's have another link I could send, I could
it's an
post to the
afternoon.
chat. Yeah, and it's free.
Yeah,
Let me see if I can get that link. No, I didn't get that. Okay,
we'll
never mind.
get it
Yeah, we'll
later.
get that later. Okay, so going on, moving swiftly on.
Yeah,
So we want to think about um, now there's this possibility of complementary and integrative health, and this is like the acupuncture and that sort of thing that's been accepted scientifically. Now we're adding practices like meditation, like qigong, like tai chi, like yoga in the whole picture because it starts to capture the whole person, right? So we keep talking about the biological, the social, the psychological, the environmental, that's all coming together. It's really, really exciting. And this is something where like, yeah, you start to find the people you want to talk to, the people who are going to be open to, Qigong research or a Qigong program. And sometimes these are the discussions we want to have, for years. And that's where the next slide, I think that Roger has made a lot of inroads, right, to have another big institution in the United States, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, has actually adopted Tai Chi and Qigong for their whole person health. So there's a lot of acceptance about this. But then what's a little my criticism, right? My criticism is it's a little bit short on implementation right now. So this is like, whoa, it's slowly happening that where there's been trainings, Tai Chi Easy Practice Leader trainings at VA centers, but we have VA centers all over the country and they're independent. They can do their trainings, they can adopt these programs, but whole person health has come out as a mandate from the top, right? So just slowly all these VA centers are going to start to wake up to use the tools that are there, to use the tools that are there. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so I also want to emphasize that last year, okay, as we talk about the institutions coming alive, Tom mentioned Peter Wayne and the Osher Center, and Peter Wayne and Gloria Ye, the two scientists who are at the Osher Center and who have done a lot of beautiful research on Qigong and Tai Chi. Tai Chi really being, or the two really being the cornerstone of a whole person health. They organized uh, a conference, and I know some of you are here. You're in the picture, right? I think it's Susan. Hello, right? You're here. This was the little IIQTC shot that we did September last year, and this was an incredible place. It was many years in the making, and I think what's going to happen is the next time this happens, maybe it's every 2 years, so possibly in 2025 it'll happen again. But there were presentations of scientists, researchers, but also the public was invited, and also specifically Tai Chi and Qigong teachers were invited, and it was just really this amazing opportunity to share practice and to share practice with scientists. So there was this beautiful dialogue that happened, and I had the great pleasure to present with Dr. Larkey, who's there in the picture there, and who is also an IIQTC graduate and who's also a scientist, right? So this is like, oh, this community is really small, but now you can make friends with these people and participate in their research. So if you want to be somebody who teaches Qigong and as part of a study, which I've done several times. So really, really exciting. This is that way of tapping into what happens when you start doing something that you love. Okay, when you start doing your Tai Chi and Qigong and you're practicing in earnest, you're sharing it with others, it will start to touch the world, right? And then the world is going to come knocking on your door and say, hey, you want to come and do this conference? Yes, you say yes, because this is what it's all about, really interacting. All right, wonderful. So let's go back now to these beautiful ideas of a biocycle social, right? And just like, oh, I love it. Bio and psycho and social model of whole person health. Okay. And in particular, this has been my wheelhouse. That's the expression of using Tai Chi and Qigong for chronic pain. And I totally am involved in two pain centers where they do use the biocycle social model of whole person health to be able to address people with chronic pain and help them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's just talk about just taking this apart a little bit. What is the biological? That's going to actually take into account in terms of pain. What is the physical, right? I want you to think about how you can map this to the three treasures, okay? So just kind of think about that a little bit. The body, right? What's happening in the body? How does the body experience pain? There's injury, there's trauma, there's some kind of event that might trigger it, right? And so this is going to be very present in somebody's life, and there might be some damage to tissue, nerve damage, for example, might happen. But then that experience is going to give rise to the psychological, right? It's going to have like, ooh, disturbed sleep. There's going to be an emotional reaction to that that might be like day after day. There's fear, there's like anxiety, there's fear of movement, there's depression, there's coping skills. What's not in here is relationships can get affected as well in that social element, right? So, all that starts to really blend and create the syndrome of chronic pain. So, chronic pain is not just in the tissues, but it's in somebody's life, right? So, this is where these pain centers where I work, okay, so this is where we want to think about is Qigong practice as therapy, right? And so how do we use Qigong to actually now start to be one of the components of health, right? Or health care. So if we think about Qigong as a mindfulness-based mind-body practice therapy, right? So this is where this literature is what really motivates somebody at a pain center to go look for Tai Chi teachers. Okay, this is where the institutions are looking for you because they're becoming aware of this research that's just very, very copious, very, very much present.
And something to be really aware of is that the research is now saying flat out mindfulness-based mind-body therapy, Qigong and Tai Chi, mind-body exercise, Qigong and Tai Chi. They're saying it point blank. And this is a new thing in the last couple of years. They wouldn't call it mindfulness-based or mind-body, but now they are. And that's a really big deal.
Right, and it correlates to pain reduction in the case of chronic pain, but there's other benefits as well because we want to think about these practices as a tonic, right? So this is like going to really improve health on that level, on many levels. So we also want to think about Tai Chi, right, as the fountain of youth, right? This is going to be something that's going to help you live longer, help you realize a little bit more of potential. So all these things start to be part of what we call these components of a healthcare program. And this is where, I go back. Next slide is this is where I have experience, right? I've worked at pain centers now for 10 years, right? So now it's like, oh, okay, and what do I do there? I teach mind body stuff, right? So it's really about education, right? This is where I really emphasize that education. So I'm not treating necessarily, right, with a Qigong therapy, but I'm really educating. So that becomes the therapy. So empowered relief in particular is a mind body program that I teach that was developed at Stanford, and it's totally a mind-body intervention, also considered a treatment. Okay, a treatment for pain, and it's this 2-hour little class that has been in the research that really has helped people cope with pain and actually reduce symptoms, right? So it reduced the actual experience of pain from like that nociceptive pain experience, but also those thoughts that come with pain, right? The helplessness, uh, the rumination, right? The anxiety that comes with pain. So it's this beautiful little practice that totally uses mind-body principles to really bring that relief, right? And then in so doing, that's going to train the brain, right? So this is that repetition of practice, super important. One session is going to be great. It's going to really help people become aware of these structures and learn about these practices. But it's that repetition that is really how change happens, right? This is slowly but surely that relief is going to happen. And then there's this great term I really want to bring to bear here, developed by or mentioned by Herbert Benson, who was mentioned many slides ago about the relaxation response. But Herbert Benson says there's also like this a remembered wellness, right? You remember going into states of relaxation, and you can call on those states, right? And that's how you start to build that chi, basically build that energy within that's going to help you get well. And then your skills of interoception, right? This is where you can change that relationship with the pain experience, right? Change the relationship with the pain experience is a really big part of what happens at the pain centers where I work, where people are there because their doctor said so. Right? They need to be doing Qigong because that's part of the whole therapy. And it's the name of the programs that I teach are the functional restoration programs. Isn't that cool? That's like, that is what Qigong is, right? You're restoring function on those three levels: body, breath, mind, spirit, all that. So thinking about it that way really makes you realize that this is the good stuff that we're learning and doing. So really quickly here, we just got the time check. Appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Real world possibilities for Qigong. This is another link we want to share with you. This is, I think, the link that Tom was referring to when we talk about frameworks for pain and whole person health. So we're going to share that really quickly there, okay, to the meeting, and you can have that. So when you get the meeting notes after this. So we want to finish with a quick discussion. Okay, so we're going to go talk about the many kinds of Qigong because this is really important, okay, that when it comes to the scientific literature, but also when it comes to something that was alluded to many slides ago at the beginning, right? Knowing your audience and who you're talking to. So in this case, we're talking to teachers, which is great, practice leaders, but we want to think about our Qigong and Tai Chi, our practices in three ways, because this is how this appears in the real world. So if we can go for that a little bit, Tom, you
Yeah,
there? Okay.
quickly. Sure. So there's three main ways to look at it. The traditional Chinese medicine, energy medicine, and meditative movement. And we've talked about the meditative movement part, but we haven't really hit the TCM and energy medicine a whole lot. So a few years ago, this Chinese medical Qigong, this is the main text in China. Roger contributed a whole rewriting a whole chapter for this on how to diagnose and prescribe Qigong. And the first part of the book is sort of traditional TCM, but then the latter part of the book goes Western. And all of a sudden it starts talking about particular diseases and symptoms uh, and that kind of thing.
And that really tells you the difference between the Eastern approach to medicine, which is prevention, and then the Western approach, which is, treatment. Okay, this is like you need the intervention. That's what Western medicine is about a lot. And that's a, gross simplification, but that's about right. Ready for the next one?
Right. Yeah. So Qigong is energy medicine. I mean, you've heard external Qigong, Reiki and therapeutic touch are basically external Qigong or versions of Qigong. At least I think they are. And I've had firsthand experience with this, some serious firsthand experience with Qi, which we don't have time for now, but we can talk if we have any time later. We can relate some stories because it's really pretty cool. But again, there's no scientific evidence for Qi, so we have to really look at it a different way. Um,
It's not that people haven't tried. There are
yeah,
some research papers about it, but there's no consensus about things, and there's no way to measure it. So this is that kind of like the frontier, right? So if we think about Qi as information exchange, that tends to be how people are looking at it right now, and that's how Peter Wayne, right, the author of the Tai Chi Guide from Harvard, and right, that's how he describes Qi, and that's actually very useful, right? To think about it that way. but we want to think about it.
Yeah, so it turns out that there's device-based vagus nerve stimulation, which is measurable and effective. And it turns out that the Qigong practice affects the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system uh, stimulus and impulses are delivered by the vagus nerve. So um, energy medicine, stimulates the vagus nerve on the one hand, but there's no experiments or clinical outcomes that prove that. It's not measurable. So you're kind of left with this little bit of a conundrum. Well, gosh, this stuff's working, but how's it working if there's no evidence for it? But the research is saying, well, yeah, there is, even though we're not measuring actual energy medicine or subtle energy per se, there's still these nice results. And there is research that says that placebo and the doctor-patient relationship are both huge. In fact, in many cases, placebo is like 30% of the treatment and why it works.
Right. And then finally,
We have Qigong as meditative movement exercise, and that's like 99.9% of Qigong in how it's practiced and taught and used, and especially in the research community. Although you'll see plenty of research papers that talk about Qi, peer-reviewed research that talks about Qi, but they don't say it's measurable. They say, oh, the Chinese say this, or this is what they take these references where people researchers are saying, well, this is the theory, but they
yes, and
never they
there's a
never say
lot
it's
of
fact.
that. So the
Yeah,
conversation is rich. It's like there's a lot of hypotheses, right? Just like, oh, it's happening on the fascia, it's happening on this level, or synchrony in brains, and that sort of stuff. Just gorgeous, gorgeous ideas. But there still needs to be a synthesis of the ideas and say this is what she is. But as we know, she is this beautiful concept that's huge. To repeat the word we've been saying a lot, is huge. It's big, and just as a concept in Chinese culture, it's kind of like infinite, right? So part of the mystery of qi is to have that reverence for it as well. So that's a big idea here. So let's finish with this idea of the
yes.
many
Right.
roads
So
to
why did we
creating
talk
health.
about that? Why did we go through all these different ways of talking about it? And it's because there's all these different applications and uses for it.
Right. So there's just going to be, when you deal with the world, right, there's going to be all these places, right? The law where you are. I think that several years ago, Tom and I wrote a paper about the regulation of practice, right? Just like, oh my gosh, there's that conversation kind of happens every few years, and that it has pluses and minuses. But we'll provide a link to that paper. Is still good, right? It's still relevant. All right. Um, let's finish with this little thought here, and we're right at the end of our time. Tom Rogers put together a beautiful kind of compendium of this Qigong healthcare concept that we talked about that captures a lot of points that we discussed. And it is a PDF that got reviewed by our friends, Dr. Peter Wayne, and Dr. Linda Larkey, Dr. Yanka, and myself. And it's available at the Qigong Institute. If you give a little donation, you will get this ebook, and it's just a wonderful way to support the work of the Qigong Institute, which has grown since Tom Rogers took over from a little database that we talked about first to like what 800. Am I saying that right, Tom? 1,000
Yeah,
articles.
right.
Now it's 16,000, 17,000 articles.
Well,
Just
it's over 18.
yeah, really over
Right.
18,000 articles now. So, just it's a labor of love. But you can go see that and see what's been curated and just play at qigonginstitute.org. Wonderful.